What's up, everyone? Welcome to Moments with the Marcelins. My name is Jun.
And my name is Stephanie. We're excited that this week we had the pleasure to sit down and have a really important conversation in regards to grief and trauma. Jun and I are mental health advocates, and we really encourage everyone to find a therapist. Just like you have a primary care doctor, for your body, we need heart healers for our souls. And sometimes there is work that goes beyond just, praying as a believer, that sometimes you need to walk that journey with someone. And so we had the honor to have Maria as part of this week's episode to kind of guide us through what is grief and what is trauma and, how to heal and navigate from that.
It was really a great conversation. In this conversation, we actually opened up and we had a little bit of a live session. Mm-hmm. And so we were able to see some areas in our lives that needed to still be addressed and dealt with. And I just pray that this episode is a blessing to you and that you can have an open heart and open mind for what God would like to share.
So Maria Fernandez, she has her master's in counseling and psychology. She is a licensed mental health counselor, and she currently works with a private practice in the state of Florida. She honestly has a passion and is devoted to her calling in regards to not only sharing the gospel, but really integrating faith and counseling as well. She has struggled a lot through her life, and I hope that in another episode we can have her share her story in regards to the challenges, the hurts, the disappointments, and even the loss that she's endured. But overall, she's persevered in her faith. And she is an amazing woman and really believes in leading and encouraging others, with a servant heart. So she's an amazing woman. She was super vulnerable and transparent, even with her own story of loss and grief. And so I hope your life is enriched by today's conversation. So Maria, welcome to the table. Thank you so much for joining us. And so can you tell us a little bit about yourself as well as your background and your profession?
Yes. First of all, thank you for inviting me, for having me. I really appreciate it. I think what you guys are doing is great. And thanks for the honor, because I feel like we don't do as a counselor, as a therapist, sometimes we don't do enough to really educate the community about what we really do and what is trauma and what is grief. So we have a lot of people that have a misunderstanding about what it is that we do. So I just really appreciate this opportunity. Absolutely. About me. Okay. I am a licensed mental health counselor, and I'm licensed in the state of Florida. I also do a lot of pastoral care type of things. I have missionary groups that I work with, missionaries who go through traumatic experiences or are going to get ready to go into the mission field. I do evaluations, and I also help them prepare for the mission field. I've also worked with some who experience trauma while they're out there. Or there's also something else called compassion fatigue, where it's not depression, but it can be very exhausting when you are in a situation that you're always giving and giving and giving. Right now, most of my practice, all of my practice is through either through Zoom or through other, like everybody else's, electronic devices because of this COVID. So I work with adolescents, 13 and over. I don't really work a lot with children, but I work with 13 and over in the areas of depression, anxiety. I work with a lot of trauma, victims of sexual abuse, victims of traumatic experiences. And right now I am dealing, and I'm starting to get more and more people that are struggling with loss of parents and grandparents through COVID, who are really grieving. I also do marriage couples. I do premarital, and I also last weekend, I did a couples weekend retreat. I'm a little different. What I do is I get a host in a home. I get no more than 6 to 8 couples. They come in and spend at least 2 full days or a day and a half, where we do what's called Gottman I'm trained in Gottman, which is skill building for couples. It is a small, intimate group. We eat together, we talk, we have a workbook. It's really a lot of wonderful techniques for communication.
You do a lot.
Love
That's
that.
amazing. That's amazing. Well, honestly, you are a blessing to anyone who you are honestly in contact with. And I want to really just kind of dive in. Like, how would you define grief and trauma within your experience as a therapist?
Grief is deep sorrow, deep loss. Probably one of the hardest grief is the loss of a loved one. We have experienced with COVID a lot of loss and a lot of grief of people losing their loved ones, to young people missing major events that they can't make up for, graduations that are gone, birthdays that can't be celebrated the way we used to do. So there's big losses, and then there's small losses. And so it's really important that we're sort of in that season, and it's been a very difficult season as we maneuver all of this. Trauma is really events and circumstances that are experienced that cause you physical or emotional distress to the point that it affects your functioning and your well-being. And trauma is interesting because we have what's called, they call it big T's and little T's, big traumas. So catastrophic, 9/11, big trauma. Living in a war-torn community, big trauma. Where there is that consistent, like major events. And then there's little traumas, and little traumas can be things like, as you're growing up, a lot of verbal abuse, bullying, things like parents got divorced and I got caught in the middle. A lot of that, if you get enough of those, believe it or not, we're finding in research now that is really affecting your later years, how you function in relationships. And as we all know, it comes out in marriages, the best of you and the worst of you.
Yes.
So that's kind of the way we all function in looking at trauma and at grief.
Now, you work for an organization called Life Strategies Counseling Center, and I want to read an excerpt from the website. It says, "There is no one way to grieve. Everyone incorporates the experience of a loss in his or own way." Maria, can you please explain to some of us the different responses people may have to grief and also loss?
I'll give you a really good example. And grief is very close to me, as my mother died it's been about 1 year and 4 months, 5 months ago. I'm a therapist. I've studied grief. That was an experience that I was like, wow, no one ever told me about this process, the process of dying. And living through that with my mom. And here's what happened. We all there's 5 siblings. I was the coming in, trying to take care of it all, trying to handle it all. And even after my mother died, I was the one, I'm going to hold it together. I'm going to be strong. And I would have my moments, but I remember one time I went running outside and I was crying. Everybody came up to me, "Oh my God, Maria's falling apart." I'm like, wait a minute. Everybody else can have their moments and I can't. My father was falling asleep everywhere. Everywhere he was falling asleep. And my brothers and sisters were looking at it. I said, that's trauma, guys. He's grieving. It's so much that he literally could not handle it. And he would just fall asleep. Wow. So sometimes we will see in some people a rage, an anger, and we're like, what is going on? You should be sad. No, people are processing, because grief sometimes opens other doors. There's your grief about your lost one, and then there's something called complex grief, where, like for me, I was grieving my mother, but then all of a sudden now I'm the caretaker of my father, and I would see his grief, and I was suffering more through the fact that my dad was grieving so hard that I was like, I didn't have room to kind of deal with my stuff and my mom, because it was so painful to leave him there. And grief can bring about, like, you cry all of a sudden, or you don't feel anything. And I do want to say real quick, there are stages of grief. Everybody goes through them. Listen, there's two schools of thought. One is 5 stages of grief, and then there's a psychiatrist. Her name was Kubler-Ross, and she's come up with 7. But I just want to give them to you real quick. Stages of grief. I'm going to go through the 5: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And denial can be avoidance, shock, fear. The anger, frustration, anxiety, irritation. I remember there were some days where I was just fighting with my husband for everything would bother me. And it was really, I was missing my mom. The third one is bargaining. Like you're trying to figure out, wait a minute, how do I find meaning in this? Telling one story. Depression, it isn't the same kind of depression, clinical depression. It's grief depression. It is an appropriate response to grief, where you feel overwhelmed, you feel hopeless, sometimes even hostility, or sometimes numb. Where I remember once everything died down, I must have spent like 2 weeks. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to see anybody. I really just wanted to be by myself, just trying to process like, oh my God, and remembering, I would have flashbacks, remembering what my mother said before she died, or what she looked like, how much weight did she lose, or, oh my God, you just really, really get overwhelmed. And then the last one is really acceptance. It's not acceptance like it's okay, but it's acceptance of, which is what I'm at right now, where I'm like, I know that my mom is at peace and she's not suffering anymore. And it's just that getting used to some new family routines without her being there. But I'm going to tell you, it is like when you go through it, you can't believe how hard it is and how the sadness that you feel.
Yeah. To kind of touch on that, recently, as of last year, Stephanie lost her grandfather.
Oh,
around
yes, sorry.
Around the age of 20. When I just turned 20, I lost my father. And so I don't think either one of us have properly grieved. I found that what I would do to kind of cope with the loss of my father is just kind of compartmentalize it. It was one of those things where I was just like, hey, let me just put it back here. I'll deal with it when I need to deal with it. I need to be here for my mom right now. She doesn't, speak the native language that strongly. I need to be the man of the household. I need to protect. I need to provide. I need to be strong. And I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to allow her to see me grieve. And so kind of to what you said, seeing your father and how you would even grieve that. I remember those moments and how that was like for me. I guess my question is, when it comes to grieving properly, how can we and others listening who are probably grieving, whether it's a loss of someone they love or a relationship, whatever it is that is lost, how do we navigate through that? Because, it's been about 12 years now, almost 12 years in about a couple of weeks. And I don't think I've properly grieved.
It's, first of all, that's the first step, is realizing I have this loss that I've not processed yet, and I know it's there. Sometimes it'll be triggered by another loss. I remember my sisters, when my mother died, my brother-in-law, he was overwhelmed because he was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm grieving the death of my grandfather who raised him. And he was like weeping. And I'm like, okay, well, you're grieving it now. I think it's also to make room for that grief, to begin to gather pictures, to be able to tell the story of who this person was in your life and what this person represented. As you do that, you're gonna kind of gauge where you're at. Like, wow, I really thought I was a little further along and I'm not. And sometimes when we have unresolved grief, it turns into depression or sadness, and you're like, man, why do I feel this way? I don't even know why I feel this way. And it's because it's there. It doesn't go away. And I'm going to tell you, if whatever you don't deal with now, take it from me, I'm much older than your generation, But whatever you don't deal with, when you start getting to a place in your life where you've bought the house, you've had the kids, you've done all of that, we call it menopause, change of life, it all comes back and you feel like you're there again. So June, I would tell you to go back and begin to gather the memories, begin to put something together. I have my mom's cookbooks. I have pictures of her, my favorite pictures. I've sort of created, and I'm still in the process of doing that, like a memory box. I've, just remembering what she meant in my life, how much I miss her. I have funny clips of her, of what she meant, because the 20-year-old inside of you is there saying, you never gave me a voice. The other thing that I always say is, there's that beautiful Bible passage where in Psalms, where David was asking the Lord, search me, O Lord, in those innermost places, and allow the Holy Spirit to reveal to you, you got to work on this.
Why do you think that some of us compartmentalize or even block out trauma, or even facing grief in our lives?
Well, actually, it helps us when you are in so much trauma that you, especially children, that you feel like you're going to die, your brain shuts down so that you can survive. There's a lot of research that's been done. There's a new a word, it's been around for a long time. It's called dissociation. Mm-hmm. And dissociation is where you sort of separate. And trauma is a really complex thing. And the way we talk about trauma is interesting, but I've learned more and more that we need to share this with everybody. We feel it in our bodies. We sometimes can be in a situation where we get triggered and we don't know why.
Yeah.
Or a lot of addiction. Most issues of addiction, there's an underlying reason why. And it's usually trauma. But putting it in a compartment and sort of keeping it there helps us survive it. The problem is you cannot you can't deal with trauma when you were a child the same way as you are as an adult. At some point, you need to be able to deal with it so that it doesn't have an impact on you. And this is what I tell people. I'm going to pretend you're on a train and you're on this train. And this was one of the things that I was taught when I was going through just learning about trauma. And as you're going through that, through your train of life, you should be able to, hey, that happened to me when I was 5, or that happened to me when I was 7, or that happened to me. What happens with trauma is it says, that happened to me when I was 5. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to, nothing. And you never got off. You never got on the train. You got stuck there. And you're 30 years old, but that abuse has happened. And I can tell you, I've had women come up to me, grandmothers, 60, 70 years old, crying, finally saying, I was sexually abused as a child and I never told anybody. And you walk around with that shame your whole life. Wow. Because there's so much shame. That is what, if in our childhood, our sense of identity, our imprint of the beings that we were created can be stolen, that's what the devil uses as a weapon to keep us in bondage. And that's why this is so important to me, because it is a lie. And when a child is sexually abused, it's their fault. They feel all the shame. They feel, not the perpetrator, the child. And then they become hypersexualized and they think, oh, I'm so sinful, I'm so horrible, and don't know how to attribute it to the fact that you were sexually abused. And there's a different way to deal with that. And then the family begins to, take this person and say, oh, don't tell anybody, because if you tell anybody, they're going to look at you that way, and there's shame and there's shame and there's shame. And meanwhile, the person inside is dying and there's nowhere to go. And the same thing with grief. Oh, you know what? Especially in our faith-based communities, and that we don't allow people to grieve. And yet, this Sunday we were studying the crucifixion of Christ, and before Christ went to the cross, he was so grieved. He asked the disciples to pray for him for a little while. He asked his father, can you please pass this cup before me? I'm like, well, he spoke it, he said it, he felt, he let it, he walked us through the whole process of this is what I'm feeling. And yet we tell people don't show that. Or horrible things that we say when people are grieving. Your mother's in a better place. Your father's in a better place. Yeah. And a part of you's like, why don't you go to a better place?
Yeah.
You don't say those things.
So real. Yeah.
We know that. We know that. But I will tell you this. I have seen grief from people that have no faith, people who have no idea of believing in a God that has our eternity. And it is really difficult. And I have seen men and women of God who despite the fact that they are grieving, and trust me, I have seen young mothers lose their children, young mothers lose their husband, young. I have seen women who have lived a whole lifetime. You're with somebody for 60 years and you lose the person that you were connected to for most of your life. And that sorrow, it's so unbelievably painful, but yet they will tell you, but it is well with my soul. I know in whom I trust. And they go to that Psalms 23, that the Lord is my shepherd. And that's where they go. I want to tell you that before my mother died, I remember I was sitting next to her. She, the Lord had a way where she really disconnected from those feelings of, oh my God, my children are going to suffer. My husband's going to suffer. My mother looked at me at one point and she woke up and she looked at me. She goes, I have a nickname. They call me Tita. She goes, Tita. And I was sitting by my mom's bedside. I go, what, Mom? She goes, why am I here? I said, oh, Mom, we're in hospice, you're dying. And she said, I know that, but why hasn't Jesus taken me home? And she was just like, am I doing something wrong? Do I need to do something? Call the nurse. So I had to go get the nurse. I bring the nurse over. She looked at the nurse. She goes, listen, my Jesus is going to take me home. This was my mother. I am ready to go, but I get nervous. So if I get nervous, you just give me something to calm me down because I have to go home. And that was one of our last conversations. And I remember as I cried, I said, Mom, you're just showing us how to die with such faith and such, like, she was so determined.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, that is such a different place to be. She had me read Psalms 23 and Psalms 27. And that is, I hold on to that. I hold on to those memories. I hold on to my mother was ready and really the Lord prepared everything. But that's not the case for everybody. We have to be really sensitive. And I have now such a deep understanding now when somebody tells me, my mother died, my father died at 20. Oh my gosh. Cry, grieve, be sad, because you know what? When you love somebody, it's part of the process that you love them.
Yeah.
And you grieve. Otherwise, then you don't, it's just a reflection of love.
Yeah. I love several things that you said that I really could hold on to. Going back to the verse, I believe where he says, ask the Lord to search you. I love that psalm that David says. And that's something that I've tried to do in my life as well, just to kind of allow God to really just work in the areas that I might be blind to and the areas of pain that I might have just kind of compartmentalized. And, it's interesting also how you touched on the fact that sometimes people, they mean well, but they say things that are just cringeworthy, and I would just caution people, unless you're getting ready to resurrect someone, don't tell someone not to cry. Don't tell someone, they're in a better place. Just grieve. Sometimes it's better for you to just be there, your presence to be there. I do want to ask a question, kind of shifting gears a little bit when it comes to trauma, because in certain communities, trauma has been normalized. some people don't even realize that they've experienced a traumatic event. And I guess my question for you is, what are some signs and indicators that an individual has gone through a traumatic experience? And what would you say their next step should be?
Yes. Sadness, anxiety, usually physical problems, headaches, where you can't determine what's going on. Really unable to sleep, a lot of sleeplessness, feeling numb. Most of the people that I get that come to trauma are at a place of, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't feel anything, and I don't know why. I just I just feel kind of a sadness, and I don't feel anything. And when I start working with them to do a background, I do a genogram on everybody I see. Um, you know, mother, father, siblings, how were you raised, all of that. Because from there, I start to look for, let's see. And I always begin to find, wow, how did you deal with this? Or, were you bullied? Yeah, but I got over it. No, you were like bullied for 5 years at 3 different schools. Like, how did you process that? How do you feel about yourself? And you begin to experience these things. When people think about counseling, they think about that, oh, I'm not crazy. Well, no. Okay. There are medical models of therapy. Okay. Medical models of people who have clinical issues that are biological that you need medication for. That's something I work together with a lot of doctors, especially when I get into bipolar disorders, and it's so easy to throw that word around when really it isn't that easy for that person. But we are doing medical management. If you were diabetic, if you had high blood pressure, if you had a medical condition, we don't think twice to say, you got to go to the doctor and get that checked out. But when we start thinking about issues of anxiety, I have so much anxiety, which so many people now are diagnosed with anxiety and depression. And usually there are underlying reasons why. There's usually a history. There's something going on. So it's really behavior and physical symptoms. Does that help? Did I kind of answer the question?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. What advice would you give to someone who maybe has never been to counseling? We're advocates for mental health. I started my journey back in like 2016, and I give myself so much more grace because I understand myself so much better. And so I think that everyone needs a mental health counselor, like everyone. But some people might be on the fence because of just even stigmas that, are still out there, unfortunately, due to this. What would you say to someone who is still hesitant to go to therapy because I just don't need it, or they're even scared to go back in order to go forward?
Well, first of all, it's really important. Sometimes referrals are good. Like, ask other people, hey, have you gone to a therapist that you really like? What is it like? Go to Psychology Today website, look up who the therapists are, and then go to their website and find out sort of what are their beliefs, and call them up, leave them a message, see if they'll call you back. You can do a little quick, hey, how do you do therapy? And ask them the question. Everybody at this point, especially in ministry, should have a season of going to therapy. I don't believe anybody should get into leadership type of things and ministerial type of things without taking a season of, let me go and do, like we do things. I know for the missionaries, I do assessments, and there's one that's really cool. It's called Adverse Childhood Experiences and Trauma. Little questionnaire. Click, 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 click. You'd be surprised what comes out of there. And all of those things are really important, because when you're going to go into leadership and you're going to go into ministry, let me tell you that the devil has your history. And that which you have not healed, he's going to use against you. So it is really important that you spend the time to really examine yourself, and to have somebody. You don't have to go to listen, I'm getting ready to go into this field, or I'm getting ready to get into a deeper ministry, and I just really want to sit with somebody. Help me go through my genogram, help me, like, teach me how to do these things so that I'm prepared. And I really kind of want to go through a period of self-examination, looking at my life, kind of how I see the world, and maybe what are some areas that I need to work on.
There's something you said earlier. I kind of want to go back to. I thought it was interesting because you brought up the example of the traumatic event as being bullied. I can identify with that. I remember early up growing up, my family being from Haiti and kind of being teased in the neighborhoods by, African American for the fact that my family spoke a different language. And what myself, my family members, and friends had to do for survival is we had to be defensive. And kind of like to what you said, like that was what I had to do to survive. And so in that particular arena, it worked. However, when I try to transfer it over in other areas and arenas in my life, what worked in that specific arena doesn't necessarily translate well. And so I just wanted to say that that is very true. I just wanted to make a comment that that is very true because it was survival for me, but I had to understand, especially, in marriage, that I don't need to be so defensive. And something that Stephanie, had to remind me, and sometimes even still does today, is that we're on the same team. And so I just kind of wanted to highlight that point, that that is very true. My next question would be, what are some common misconceptions that people have about therapy? And what are some common misconceptions that people in the church have about therapy?
A lot of common misconceptions is that, confidentiality, very fearful that someone's going to find out what I'm saying, stuff's going to get out there. If you are going to a licensed mental health counselor, it's the law. The only times where it's not is in these situations. If there's an abuse on a minor, on an elderly person, or someone disabled, we're mandated reporters and we have to report that. Otherwise, mostly everything that you say is confidential. For young people, yeah, if you're a cutter, I'm not going to have you cutting and then your parents don't know that you're a cutter and now you died because you cut. No. That's self-harm is, yeah. We have to do that. Now, what I will tell you with my younger people, this is what I do. I'll usually talk to them for a while and then I'll coach them and I will be with them when we bring the parents in. I'm like, look, I'm going to help you with this. You're not going to be alone. The other fear is I'm not going to be able to handle it. Now, I will tell you, how can I give you an example? Let's say you just lost your father. But then you were also sexually abused as a child. And then, and then you were bullied. And then obviously you cannot handle all of that. So yes, you want to go to somebody who is clinically prepared to understand that they're not going to flood you. You're not going to be flooded all the time of all these emotions. So you need to go to people that at least know how to ground you, have the basic, this is how you handle a flashback, have a safety protocol to make sure. But and also if you do not connect with your therapist, don't keep going to that person because you're not going to say anything.
Yeah.
You're not going to talk. And I've had young people come there. I'm not saying anything. I said, okay, you can go. They're like, what? I said, I'm not going to fight with you. I'm not your mama. You don't live with me. I'm not going to. And they're like, really? You're not going to? I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to sit here and fight with you. If you're not prepared to do it, I understand. So you really have to go to somebody, especially if you're taking your children or your adolescents or, someone who's already a teenager. They'll tell you if they like the person or not. If they don't, let it go. Help them find somebody that they feel comfortable with. I will tell you with high schoolers, I really recommend that you allow them to be part of the process in picking the therapist. Like tell them, listen, what do you think about these three? Why don't you pick your favorite one? And let them read up a little bit. And, I think I want to try this person. Like let them be a part of it. But there's a lot of misconceptions that most people, after they're like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I'm like, well, what did you think it was going to be? Well, I don't know. I said, okay, well, basically counseling is for you to have a safe place to be able to come to and begin to talk through things that sometimes you don't even have words. Sometimes I have to give a list of words to my clients and say, here's some words, because they haven't felt in such a long time. From a faith-based perspective, years ago when I started this, oh my gosh, I was so criticized. Psychology is from the devil. Oh my gosh, how can you even think about doing this? This is not from God. I will tell you, there's a lot of new age in this. There's a lot of Buddhist type mentality in some of this that people bring to the table. But there's a lot of universal laws and principles that we as believers walked away from the table. We should have been there. And we are back. We have wonderful psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors who are really on a platform of knowing a foundation of Jesus Christ. But here's what makes us different. And I was listening to this the other day. If you get a chance, Summit. Summit has some really good videos, and they just did something on teen suicide and are really recommending that all like youth pastors and leaders get certified in what's called first aid. And you don't have to be a licensed mental health counselor. You can go ahead and take these classes, and it helps you to be able to identify and give first aid, especially if someone is suicidal. So that's, really important that we begin to do that. But, I think about when Jesus said, and I will leave with you a counselor, the Holy Spirit, who's our counselor. And in many other religions and a lot of followings, they can say, well, everything is spiritual. Or those who don't believe and are agnostic, everything is physical. But we have a faith where, listen, we're biological, right? There's a physical, there's a spiritual, and there's also an emotional. And we deal with all of it. We work through all of it. So some things may be, listen, you have a spiritual, your foundation in faith is, there's a theology here that is keeping you in bondage. And we need to talk about that. You know what? Yeah, you were delivered from the trauma of sexual addiction or porn. But now we have to build your character.
That's so good.
You have to build your character. You have to have a godly character. Mm-hmm. How are you going to do this? Why is it that we have pastors who fall to the side to fornicate or commit adultery? It's a character issue. And it's usually coming from childhood and past stuff that you never dealt with. Hidden sin, things that happen to you. Sometimes not even sin. Sometimes it's just confusion, low self-esteem. Like, I've never felt like now I'm in a pulpit and I have all these people and oh my gosh. And all of a sudden there's a part of you that comes out that you're like, I never know I had this, and you get caught off guard. And no, you better know yourself. And where is your character? We're called to be holy and to be a people of character. And in counseling, that's the role. And I see that all the time. Listen, I deal with missionaries that are out there. Oh my gosh, they love the Lord. They have given up everything. That doesn't mean that they're not going to go through trauma. So one of the things that came that I really, really love, and I have life strategies, but I'm starting a new transitioning into what's called life restoring ministry, because I find myself doing more and more ministry in this field, especially with people overseas that the Lord is bringing. But if you go to 1 Peter, you go to chapter 5, it talks about shepherding the flock, and it talks to really the leaders, and it talks to young people, it talks to the elders. And then this is my favorite passage that sort of has been where I have been this year. And it says, and I'm reading 1 Peter 5:10. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself, now let's look at the process, restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you.
Amen.
And that's my story. That's what the Lord has done in my life. I do what I do because I have sat on the other side. I know what it is to be broken, to be sad, to be depressed, to grieve, to have trauma, to have flashbacks, to not even know who you are anymore, to act out, to be angry, to be depressed, to be anxious. I was like, but I also know what it is to be restored. And the Lord used counselors in my life to help me in this process, to understand what I was thinking. And some of them were Christians and some of them were not, but I would go home, like they would give me a theory and I would go home and I would say, Holy Spirit, you got to help me understand this because this isn't making sense to me. And the Lord would bring such revelation into my life that I was like, I get it. I get it. I have to be careful with this because I was hurt here. And these are soul wounds. And the Holy Spirit is trying to heal me. But I'm too caught up in myself. And we need to know this stuff because our young people are not learning about absolute truths. And they're allowing themselves to be led by historical pain and soul wounds that don't allow them to see the truth. All they feel is pain. And now I'm finding, now I know when I do a genogram, I also ask, especially if they're African American or come from other countries, hey, what have you dealt with historically in the arena of racism? And how about your father, your mother? Even among African Americans, well, I was light skinned, and because I was light skinned, I had issues with dark skin, and and then I came from a fixed family, so I wasn't black enough, I wasn't white enough, and oh my gosh, all of that I have to go to, but we are children of God, and we are all brothers and sisters, and we are called to love one another. And counseling is like, I give you tools. I'm giving you tools. You decide if you want to use them or not. And I think it's a vehicle of which is very important. And it really is something that not just I do, pastors do it. You guys do it. You do it when you are with these young people and you see the brokenness.
A verse that kind of comes to mind when you talk about that is that, Christ came so that we can have life and life more abundantly. If he simply came to just for salvation, the moment we gave our hearts to him, he would have taken us with him. But no, he came for us to have life and have life more abundantly. And oftentimes, people in the church, there's a heart conversion, but Paul says in Romans 12:2, we also need to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. And so it's more than just a heart conversion, but it's also a mind transformation that needs to happen on a daily basis. And I love...
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry to interrupt. This is so passionate to me.
Yes.
Because sometimes we preach salvation and then we leave them there. But no, this is the gospel of Jesus Christ from Genesis to Revelation. We have eternity, but he's telling us, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We have to be a holy people. You guys are a generation of warriors who now have to put on the armor of God. You had to be versed in the word of God because you're going to have to stand up. You're going to have to stand for Christ, and you are not going to be popular.
Yeah. Dr. Nina Phillips, she puts it best. She's a mental health therapist as well. She says, prayer is my weapon, but therapy is my strategy. And I think we need to have that mindset that it's both and. It's not either or, but both and.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you that there have been situations where all the therapy in the world doesn't help, because it isn't about that. It's about a soul that needed to be healed by the power of Jesus Christ and the sacrifice that he did on the cross.
Absolutely.
And there is nothing that will replace that. That's the foundation on which I stand on for believers and unbelievers. And if the door opens for me as I'm doing therapy and I can somehow share, I will do that. I'm very respectful. And there are boundaries around that. But for my faith brothers and sisters, I'm like, do you want to do this? Because if you want to do this, I'll ride the roller coaster with you and the waves. But there's something about having a safe place where we can do this, a safe place where you can kind of like let everything go. I really feel many times it's such a sacred honor, the things that people tell me, and and how just how I see the Lord work in their lives and restore them. And I see that too. A lot of people are, God, how can you handle it? How can you? Yeah, there's days, but I am a woman of faith.
Yeah.
I believe in the power, the healing power of Jesus Christ, and that's where I go.
Yeah, it's crazy. 1 Peter 5:10 is my absolute favorite verse. And the fact that you read it, and it's crazy because the podcast that's the foundation of like when we started this podcast,
Mhm.
was that we wanted to allow for moments of restoration, you know what I mean, to take place. And
Yes.
you know me, and you know a little bit of about my story. And so I know how, and I've seen how God has restored, you know what I mean, my life through, yes, there was moments where there was like the miraculous happened, right? Like God did something suddenly in my life and it changed, and he restored me and he empowered me, and and he gave me the courage and the boldness. But there was other moments where my restoration was a process. My restoration didn't come in a moment.
Right.
It came through constantly, doing the work that I needed to do so he can restore and ultimately get the glory. And sometimes I know when I started going to therapy, I felt like it wasn't happening, you know what I mean, at the pace that I wanted it to happen. And, this is my story. So I remember when I first met with you, you were like, what do you want to talk about? I was like, well, I'm just angry all the time, and I wanted my anger to just like go away. And I wanted my anger just to like, okay, I just want to be at peace, or I just want to be okay, or I just want to wake up and like, I don't know, feel happy. You know what I mean? Like just basic things. And that didn't come in a week or two, that came through the process of restoration, and doing the work that you gave me the tools to do. You know what I'm saying? And so, for anyone listening that's like even going to start this journey, is like, don't get discouraged of the process. Your trauma, your pain didn't sometimes just appear in a day. It's
Mhm.
been years of you being and acting a certain way, and it's not going to go away, you know what I mean, in just one session either.
I find it interesting that, like, when we're getting a career, we'll struggle through college, right? Very painful. Sleepless
Mm.
nights. Like, it's not an easy
No,
thing.
yeah.
Test, and then you got to do an internship, and then, now you got to go to the field of work. We're willing to do all of that because there's a payment that we're going to receive, right? Well, in counseling, it gets bad before it gets better. Sorry, but you've
Mm.
abandoned your feelings. You've not talked about this, and you want to come in and in 4 quick sessions, I'm healed. It doesn't work that way, because you know what? You need to build character.
Mm.
And as you go through that process, you build character. You learn how to be consistent. You learn how to talk through things. You learn how to feel. And this First Peter, before it talks about shepherding the flock, it talks about suffering as Christians. We are called to suffer. Let us stop pretending that we're going to suffer and the Lord is going to use that. You can't be empathic. You cannot be understanding if your whole life is so perfect. You don't need anybody. You don't need God. Everything's so great. My life is wonderful. No, no. We're going to suffer. And you know why we're going to suffer? Because we live in this flesh, because we have to deny ourselves, because we have to pick up our cross daily, and because we have to trust in the Lord. And honestly, it's about us, but it's not all about us. And the more we deny ourselves, the more we find ourselves. See, Christianity and this faith walk is so different than any other religion, because in our faith, you know what? You're not number one. God is number one. It isn't about your selfish desires. It's about letting go. It's about being the hands of Christ, the feet of Christ, of loving somebody who's hard to love, about being tenderhearted, about accepting. And that's what we're to build our character in.
On that note, on accepting, What would you say, what advice would you give to someone who knows someone, whether it be a friend, a spouse, someone they may be in a relationship with, dealing with trauma? How should their response be for someone dealing with trauma or grief?
You know what? We live in the age of information. And the first thing I would tell you is you need to read up. You need to start reading up. You need to get educated. I am amazed at how many couples get married and one of them would have been raped or sexually abused, never told the other person. You see it in the relationship, it's gonna come out. You try to hide it, it's gonna come out. And I'm like, how can you even think of getting married if you can't trust your loved one to tell them, hey, I was raped or this happened to me or this, you're not ready to get married yet. Like, hold up. Deal with your stuff, work on your stuff, be compassionate, do not be judgmental, be there and be consistent. And sometimes it's just listening and just listen. Don't try to fix it. Just be there and listen and love them. My biggest healing, a lot of stuff that I got in my marriage just came from my husband Raul, just being there. And asking me a really good question. He's like, babe, how do you want me to help you? So I just want you to listen. He goes, babe, do you need to go, do you need to talk to somebody right now? Do you need to, you know what? I think so. But never did I feel condemned or judged or you shouldn't feel that way or that's ridiculous. No, but you need to get educated about trauma because trauma, people can have flashbacks, people can have nightmares, people will forget conversations that you had with them. That's a part of trauma. It affects your memory and you'll start, what are you talking about? And you're crazy. No, it affects it. So you have to really understand it so that you can be supportive to your loved one.
This has been so refreshing to me. And I can only imagine as a therapist, the miracles that you see in people's lives, because as a believer, we believe that God can do all things,
Yes.
But how has therapy, been a blessing in your life from maybe a receiving end, I know you shared about, the loss of your mom and I can only imagine, both of you guys have lost, parents and I'm so blessed to have mine with me, but how has that blessed your life?
Right when I got to the 6-month mark and I knew I wasn't processing things the way I normally do, I went for help. And therapists are hard to find therapists. It's like a doctor trying to find a doctor.
Or a
But
good barber.
to somebody that I knew. His name is Luis Arrocho. I'll say his name because I'm a therapist and I don't. His name is Luis Arrocho, and he was wonderful, a very godly therapist. He understood where I was coming from, but man, he really just allowed me to grieve, to have a place where I didn't feel like I was laying it all on my husband, where I could kind of go and just this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm seeing, this is what's going on. And he was so good just about allowing me to process that grief. And it helped me tremendously. I mean, just tremendously to be able to move forward. And I'm still grieving. I still have moments where I have one of my mom's batitas, her nightgowns in my closet. And the other day I was going through it and I saw it and I smelled it and I came into Raul's office and I was crying. He goes, what happened? What happened? I said, I just miss my mom. He's like, okay, does it? He's like, okay, I miss her too, babe. It's all right. And just to allow yourself to feel what you need to feel without being judged or condemned. It's okay. You're always, especially like June, you're always going to have a place in your heart that you're going to miss your dad. As much as we think sometimes healing means you don't ever feel it again. No, because gosh, how can you not? That's always going to be there. It doesn't mean you weren't healed, but you almost want to respect that part. Yeah, there's a little part in my heart. I have a mother who lost her daughter to cancer, and wow, she's always going to miss her. doesn't mean that she's not healed. She knows very well and has faith in the Lord. But man, that's her daughter. So just allowing ourselves to be transparent and to be vulnerable and to feel what we need to feel. And when the Bible talks about that we're to confess our sins to one another, it's not because we forgive each other. It's because we can be vulnerable and trusting enough that we can be accountable to one another as the body of Christ. And it doesn't turn into gossip. It turns into, man, I just want to pray for you and I just want to be here for you.
That's so good. And I think, going to the back to the fact when I lost my father, I don't know who I would be today if that didn't happen, and it's one of those things, like you said, it's always there. And I have those moments where I do grieve and things like that. But it's just, refreshing to hear, when people, who can really relate to that aspect of it, because that you're not alone. And I've also seen how my story has been able to help others who are either going through the process or it's going to happen. And so I've seen kind of a little bit of a glimpse of the reason why. And so I think that, as challenging and as tough as it is, that's kind of that's one of those things that keeps me going. It's one of those things that keeps me going, and just knowing that God is with me each and every day. So,
yes.
So are there any final thoughts that you would like to share before we conclude?
Yeah, I really want to encourage people to reach out, to be more vulnerable, and to ask for help, especially in this season of so much turmoil going on in our world. You've been locked up for a while. COVID sort of brought out the dysfunction in families. That things were really bad and you just decided you would never pay attention to it. COVID brought out a lot of loneliness, abuse, unhappiness, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's so many of us that are here, and we want to be here for you, but you need to take the first step. Like, you got to want to be healed. If nothing else, desire that. You got to know that there's something better out here for you, that God has a plan and a purpose, and you being unhappy and living a life filled with anxiety and depression, that ain't it. And we need to begin to become vulnerable and say, hey, I need help. I'm not in a good place and I need help. So I encourage you to do that. Fight and really want your healing. And it doesn't have to be that way. I also want to encourage you. I have a few resources. This one it's called Healing the Wounded Heart. It's an amazing workbook. Dan Allender, very good, faith-based, for those that are dealing, with sexual abuse. Really, really good. There's also some other resources. This is my go-to, coping with trauma-related dissociation. It's for patients and therapists. You kind of work through it together. These are like really heavy duty books, but it's stuff. There's a lot of really cool stuff out there. And sometimes I let my clients look through it. And as you thumb through it, you're like, wow, it's all this. I go, yeah, it's all that. This is everything that happens to you when stuff is going on. There's NAMI, which is the National Association for Mental Illness, that has all kinds of resources. And I do want to tell you, 211. You feel sad, you feel suicidal, you are overwhelmed, 211. In Orange County, Osceola County, and I know in other counties, they have mobile crisis therapists. They're not all faith-based, but you know what? You need to get the help. They will call you. Right now, I know Osceola and Orange don't go to your house, but they will call you and do an assessment. When COVID is over, I want you to tell you, there are mobile trauma therapists. That's all they do. And they will go to the house and do an assessment. You have a child that's out of control and you're not sure what you should do, call them. They have so many free resources. That 211 number is great. You can let them know what's going on and they will give you support. But get help. Ask for help.
Thank you so much, Maria.
I'm just speechless. This was
This is
a
amazing.
great
Thanks
conversation.
for having me, guys.
No, thank you. We
And
really
thank you for
appreciate
being
it.
vulnerable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow, that was such an awesome conversation that we just had with Maria. I really want, for those listening to really take advantage of those resources that she provided toward the end. We'll definitely make sure in the link that you can find that information so you or someone can get the help that you need. But again, your mental health, your emotional and spiritual health is very important. And if you've dealt with trauma, if you've dealt with a loss, or you're currently going through it right now, please find yourself a counselor, find yourself a mentor, or someone that you can talk to, a life coach, to really assist you in this area.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for tuning in. We hope that this episode enriched your life, and wherever you are in this journey of trauma or loss, or even assisting someone who has gone through trauma or loss in their lives. Take care.
God bless and much love.